Imagine walking into work thinking you're just another day away from a promotion, only to discover your new boss has torched a multi-million-dollar contract, all because he couldn't keep his ego, or his romance with the CEO, under control. That Monday morning, I watched him strut into the conference room, designer suit catching the light, completely oblivious that in exactly 4 hours, his career would be over. He'd made one fatal mistake underestimating the quiet strategist he'd publicly humiliated just 3 weeks earlier. My name is Harper Lane, and for 7 years, I'd been the strategic architect behind Vanguard Metric's most lucrative accounts. Not that you'd know it from the org chart I was buried 3 levels deep, officially a senior strategy analyst, but everyone from the C-suite down knew when they needed a deal to close. They came to me. That Tuesday morning in March started like any other. I'd arrived at 6:45 a.m., beating the Seattle rain and the elevator rush, spreading my analysis across the conference room table like a general planning a campaign. The Summit Dynamics presentation was my baby 12 weeks of market research, competitive analysis, and financial modeling distilled into 47 slides of pure strategic gold. This wasn't just another pitch. It was a $78 million contract that would secure Vanguard's position for the next 3 years. At 9 a.m. sharp, our new marketing director walked in. Ethan Cole. 6'2" of manufactured confidence wrapped in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He'd been with us exactly 4 days, parachuted in from some boutique firm in New York, and the whispers had already started. Late-night calls with our CEO, private lunches, the kind of chemistry that had nothing to do with marketing strategies, and everything to do with why his predecessor had been mysteriously restructured out of existence. "Morning, team," he said, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension that only comes from people who've never actually built anything themselves. His eyes swept the room, lingering on my carefully arranged materials. "Interesting spread, but we won't be needing all this." I kept my expression neutral. "The Summit Dynamics presentation is in 3 days. This is the final review." About that, he picked up my executive summary, scanning it with theatrical disappointment. "Harper, right, look, I appreciate the effort, but this is exactly the kind of soulless slide deck that's been holding this department back. Where's the story? Where's the emotional hook?" The room went silent. My 2 junior analysts, Marcus and Priya, exchanged glances. They'd been with me through 6 successful pitches, knew my methods, trusted my instincts, but now they watched as this newcomer held up weeks of our work like it was contaminated. "The story," I said evenly, "is in the data. Summit Dynamics values precision, not poetry. Their CFO, Lucille Hart, specifically requested—" "I know what clients think they want," Ethan interrupted, his smile sharp as glass. "But what they need is vision, inspiration, not another boring walk through spreadsheet land." He dropped my summary back on the table. "I'll handle the presentation personally. You can assist with, let's call it slide beautification. Make sure the fonts match, that sort of thing." Slide beautification. 7 years of strategic wins, and I'd just been demoted to PowerPoint janitor in front of my entire team. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the blood pounding in my ears. "Should I forward you the client relationship notes, the 15 years of institutional knowledge about Summit's decision-making process?" "That won't be necessary." He was already checking his phone, dismissing me without looking up. "Fresh eyes, fresh perspective. Sometimes knowing too much history just weighs you down." Marcus started to speak. I could see the protest forming, but I caught his eye and shook my head slightly. "Not here, not now." Ethan gathered my materials into a messy pile, treating my work like scratch paper. "I'll need you to clean up whatever I send over by end of day. Make it look professional. You know, that's your wheelhouse, right? Making things pretty." The insult was so casual, so perfectly delivered, that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined it, but Priya's sharp intake of breath told me I hadn't. "Absolutely," I said, standing slowly, deliberately. "I'll make sure everything looks exactly as it should." He missed the edge in my voice, too busy scrolling through his messages to notice the way Marcus and Priya were looking at me like they were watching a fuse being lit. Great. Team meeting's over. I need to prep for my lunch with Richard. Richard, our CEO, of course. Harper, I'll send you my vision deck by 3. Have it polished by 5. As the room emptied, I stood alone among the scattered papers of my original presentation. 12 weeks of work dismissed in 12 minutes. But Ethan Cole had just made a critical error, the kind that overconfident men always make. He'd assumed that quiet meant weak, that professional meant pushover. He had no idea that I'd spent 7 years learning exactly how this company worked, where the bodies were buried, and most importantly, who really held the power. And he certainly didn't know about my history with Lucille Hart. That evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, nursing a glass of wine and staring at a worn leather notebook. Not a corporate planner or digital device, this was something far more precious. Lucille Hart's personal strategy journal from 2009, gifted to me when I was nothing more than a 23-year-old analyst drowning in data sets. People saw Lucille now, CEO of Summit Dynamics, a $2 billion consulting empire, regular on CNBC, but I knew her from before the IPO, before the corner office, back when she was a senior partner fighting for her first major acquisition, and I was the junior analyst assigned to crunch her numbers at a conference in Boston. I'd worked 36 hours straight on her competitor analysis. She found me at 3 a.m. in the hotel business center, face planted on my keyboard, surrounded by empty coffee cups and printouts covered in color-coded highlights. Instead of the disgust I expected, she'd laughed, really laughed, and said, "You know, there's smart, and then there's stupid smart. Let me teach you the difference." She spent the next 4 hours teaching me what she called translation, not language translation, strategy translation, how to take complex data and distill it into power, how to read a room's hidden dynamics, how to make numbers tell stories that moved millions. "Most people think data is about facts," she'd said, sketching diagrams on a napkin. "But data is about decisions, and decisions are about people. Never forget, behind every spreadsheet is a human being trying not to look stupid in front of their boss." When she left my company 6 months later to start building Summit Dynamics, she handed me this notebook. "My playbook," she'd said. 15 years of learning how to win? Don't copy it, evolve it." I'd memorized every page. Her negotiation tactics, her methods for reading executive teams, her notes on which metrics actually mattered versus which ones just looked impressive in presentations. But more than strategies, the notebook contained stories, wins and losses. The executive who tanked $1 million deal because he couldn't admit he'd misread a graph. The analyst who saved a merger by catching a decimal error everyone else missed. And on page 47, circled 3 times in red ink, "Never let them see you coming. Revenge is a dish best served with a PowerPoint and a smile." My phone buzzed. "Marcus. Harper, this is insane. That presentation was perfect. Want me to talk to Richard?" I texted back, "No, let it play out." Priya had sent 17 messages, each more indignant than the last. She'd worked 60-hour weeks on the Summit project. Her boyfriend had threatened to leave her over the missed dinners. And now Ethan was taking credit for everything. I opened my laptop and pulled up Ethan's vision deck that he'd sent at 3:47 p.m., 47 minutes late. Naturally, it was exactly what I'd expected, all style. No substance. Gradient backgrounds and animated transitions trying to hide the fact that he'd fundamentally misunderstood Summit's business model. He'd pitched them as a traditional consulting firm ready for disruption, when in reality, they were the disruptors. It was like trying to sell Tesla on becoming more like Ford. But the real gift was his financial projections. He'd copied them from a template. I recognized the formulas from a widely circulated McKinsey deck that had been debunked 2 years ago. The ROI calculations were wrong. Not obviously wrong, but wrong enough that someone like Lucille would spot them in seconds. I could fix it. 3 hours of work, maybe 4, and I could save this deal. Save Ethan from himself. Be the good soldier. Instead, I opened a new email to Lucille. We hadn't spoken in 6 months, not since her last visit to Seattle, but some relationships transcend time. L heads up on Thursday's presentation, new leadership, new approach. Deck wasn't vetted through my normal process. Expect noise. H. I hesitated over the send button. This wasn't just about protecting a deal. This was me signaling to Lucille that the careful relationship we'd built between our companies, the trust that had made both of us successful, was about to be tested by someone who didn't even know the game he was playing. Her response came in 12 minutes. Interesting. Richard approved this. Call me tomorrow after 2 p.m. I smiled, remembering another note from her journal. When someone shows you who they are, let them. Then use it. Ethan wanted to run this show fine. I'd give him exactly what he asked for his vision. Polished to a perfect shine. Every wrong assumption highlighted with gorgeous formatting. Every flawed calculation presented in stunning clarity. I opened the deck and got to work, making his mistakes beautiful. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about what you do, it's about what you don't do. And I was about to not save Ethan Cole from the most spectacular failure of his career. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, perfectly matching my mood as I walked into Vanguard's office at my usual 6:45. But today, I had a purpose beyond beating traffic. I needed 2 hours alone with Ethan's deck before anyone else arrived. I'd already done the obvious work the night before, fixed his fonts, aligned his graphics, made his transitions smooth as silk. What he'd sent me at 3:47 p.m. yesterday was now a visual masterpiece. Every slide gleamed with professional polish. The colors perfectly matched Summit's brand guidelines. The animations were subtle but impressive. It was, quite literally, the prettiest disaster I'd ever created. But now came the delicate part, the surgical strikes. First, I carefully removed 3 critical footnotes from his financial projections, the ones that would have explained his assumptions. Without them, his numbers stood naked and indefensible. Any first-year analyst would ask where they came from. Lucille would eviscerate them. Second, I left his fundamental mischaracterization of Summit's business model untouched but beautifully formatted. He'd actually written, and I quote, "Summit Dynamics needs to embrace traditional consulting methodologies to remain competitive." It was like telling Amazon they should open more physical bookstores. But now it was presented in stunning 48-point font with a gorgeous slide transition. Third, and this was my masterpiece, I found the section where he'd plagiarized the McKinsey framework and made it prominent. Slide 23 right in the middle of his revolutionary insights. I even added a subtle animation to draw the eye. Lucille had seen that framework a dozen times. She'd probably laugh out loud. But here's where I got clever. I added one slide, just one of actually good content. Slide 31, a single. Powerful insight about market positioning that was genuinely brilliant. Something I discovered in my research but hadn't included in my original deck. I buried it near the end, after Ethan would likely be floundering. Why? Because I needed Lucille to know I was still here, still watching, still capable. At 8:15, Marcus arrived and found me in the break room, making my 3rd cup of coffee. "You look surprisingly calm for someone who just got professionally assassinated," he said, pouring his own cup. "Did I asked, stirring in cream slowly. "I thought I got promoted to slide beautification specialist." He studied me carefully. Marcus was sharp MIT graduate, 2 years at Goldman before joining my team. He knew my tells. "You're going to let him present that garbage, aren't you?" "I'm going to let him present his vision," I corrected, beautifully formatted, exactly as requested. "Harper, this is a $78 million deal," which Ethan assured us he can handle with fresh eyes and fresh perspective. I took a sip of coffee. Who am I to interfere with genius? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "You talked to Lucille." It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. "Jesus, Harper, you're playing chess while he's playing checkers." "No," I said, heading back to my desk. "He's not even playing. He doesn't know there's a game." At 11 a.m., Ethan summoned me to his office, the one that had been my skip-level manager's until last week's restructuring. He was on a call when I walked in, feet up on the desk, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. He waved me to sit without looking at me. Richard, buddy, trust me on this. Summit's going to eat this up. Our CEO, of course. I've got Harper here now, yeah. The analyst, she cleaned up the deck. It's gorgeous. He finally looked at me, hitting mute. The presentation file, you have it ready. I handed him a USB drive. Everything's on there. Main presentation, backup slides, and supporting documents. Supporting documents. In case anyone asks about methodology, standard practice. He waved dismissively. Won't need those. This is about vision, not documentation. But sure, whatever makes you feel useful. I watched him unmute and continue charming Richard, promising a revolutionary approach and a guaranteed win. He actually used the phrase, disrupt the disruptors, which made me bite my tongue to keep from laughing. As I left his office, I sent a simple text to Priya. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., clear your calendar for a call. She responded immediately, what's happening? Career planning discussion. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her reply. Yours or mine? Yes. Tomorrow, Ethan would walk into Summit Dynamics with absolute confidence, armed with a beautiful presentation that would destroy him, and I would sit quietly in the back of the room, taking notes like a good little analyst, watching him dig his own grave with my perfectly polished shovel. The best part, he'd thank me for it. Thursday, 1:47 p.m., Summit Dynamics headquarters, 42nd floor. The conference room was a monument to corporate power, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. A table that could seat 20 but today held only 8. Lucille sat at the head, flanked by her CFO and head of strategic partnerships, our side Richard, Ethan, myself, and 2 senior VPs who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Ethan was in his element, or thought he was. He'd worn a different Tom Ford suit navy with subtle pinstripes and had spent the elevator ride up practicing his opening lines on Richard, who nodded along with the vacant enthusiasm of someone thinking about his tea time. Lucille, Richard, everyone thank you for this opportunity, Ethan began, striding to the front of the room like he owned it. What I'm about to show you isn't just a proposal, it's a paradigm shift. I sat in the corner, laptop open, ostensibly taking notes. Actually, I was watching Lucille. She hadn't looked at me once since we'd entered, but I caught the microscopic twitch of her eyebrow at paradigm shift. Ethan clicked to his first slide a gorgeous wash of blue and silver with the words, Disrupting the Disruptors, in bold letters. Summit Dynamics has built an empire on innovation, he said, gesturing dramatically, but every empire needs evolution. Today, I'm proposing we help you embrace the traditional consulting frameworks that have stood the test of time. The CFO, Janet, if I remembered correctly, leaned forward slightly. Traditional frameworks. Exactly. Ethan clicked to slide 2, my beautifully formatted disaster of a market analysis. While you've been focused on innovation, your competitors have been perfecting the classics, McKinsey's 7S framework, Boston Consulting Group's growth matrix, the fundamentals you've been too busy to implement. I watched Lucille's fingers tap once, twice on the table. She'd built Summit Dynamics specifically to destroy those traditional frameworks. It was like telling Steve Jobs he should make Apple more like IBM. But Ethan pressed on, oblivious, slide after slide of gorgeous nonsense. He hit slide 23, the plagiarized McKinsey framework, with particular enthusiasm. This revolutionary approach to market segmentation, he began. Interesting, Lucille interrupted, her voice neutral as Swiss chocolate. This looks familiar. Where did this framework originate? Ethan didn't miss a beat. My proprietary methodology, developed it at my previous firm. Janet actually coughed. The McKinsey framework was from 2018. It had been featured in Harvard Business Review, twice. Fascinating, Lucille said. Please, continue. By slide 30. Ethan was sweating despite the perfectly climate-controlled room. His projections were up now. Those beautiful naked numbers without any supporting documentation. A 340% ROI within 18 months, he announced. Based on this from Summit's head of strategic partnerships, a man who looked like he ate spreadsheets for breakfast. Market dynamics and growth trajectories, Ethan said smoothly. Which specific dynamics? Which trajectories? Ethan clicked frantically to his backup slides, the ones I hadn't touched. They were a mess of copy-pasted Google searches and Wikipedia excerpts. The contrast with the polished main deck was jarring. Then he hit slide 31. My slide. The one brilliant insight I'd hidden in his deck. However, he read, clearly seeing it for the first time, the real opportunity lies in Summit's unique position to leverage reverse integration strategies in emerging markets, particularly in Southeast Asia, where traditional consulting has failed to penetrate the micro-enterprise sector. Lucille's head tilted slightly. That was actually good, really good, and definitely not Ethan's. Elaborate on that, she said. Ethan stared at the slide like it was written in Sanskrit. Well, the reverse integration is, obviously. Perhaps Harper could elaborate. Lucille's eyes found mine for the first time. I believe she worked on our Southeast Asia analysis last quarter. Every head turned to me. Richard looked confused. Ethan looked trapped. I stood slowly, walking to the front of the room. The micro-enterprise sector in Southeast Asia represents $847 billion in untapped consulting potential, I said quietly. Traditional firms can't reach them because they're using traditional frameworks, but Summit's digital-first, modular approach. You could dominate that market in 3 years. Interesting, Lucille said. Ethan, is this your analysis? We worked on it together, he said quickly. I see. Lucille closed her portfolio. Ethan, one question. In your extensive research of our company, what would you say is Summit's core value proposition? He straightened, sensing a lifeline. Innovation, disruption, moving fast and breaking things. The room went silent. Even Richard winced. That was Facebook's old motto, and Summit had publicly rejected it in a Wall Street Journal op-ed Lucille had written titled, Build Fast, Break Nothing, the Myth of Destructive Innovation. Lucille stood. Thank you for your time. Richard, we'll be in touch. As we filed out, I felt my phone buzz. A text from Lucille. Your office? Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Bring your real deck. Ethan was already in the elevator, frantically calling someone, probably trying to figure out what had just happened. Richard stood frozen by the reception desk, his face the color of expensive concrete. I took the stairs, 22 floors down. By the time I reached the lobby, I had 3 missed calls from Marcus and a text from Priya. LinkedIn shows Lucille just viewed my profile. What did you do? I stepped into the Seattle drizzle and smiled. Ethan thought he'd played his hand perfectly. He had no idea the game had been over before he'd even walked into that room. Friday, 2 p.m. Not my office, I didn't have one, but Lucille had commandeered Vanguard's executive conference room, the one usually reserved for board meetings. She was already there when I arrived, sitting alone at the massive table, reading something on her tablet. Harper. She looked up, and for the first time in years, she looked tired. Sit. We need to talk about yesterday's comedy show. I sat across from her, placing my original presentation, the real one, on the table between us. Richard called me 6 times last night, she continued. Apparently, Ethan is his nephew's college roommate's cousin, or something equally idiotic. He wanted me to give the boy another chance. And I told him Summit doesn't do charity work. She opened my presentation, flipping through slowly. This is what you originally prepared. 12 weeks of work, every metric you care about, every risk assessed, every opportunity mapped. She studied page after page, occasionally nodding. When she reached the financial projections, the real ones, with full documentation, she actually smiled. This would have closed the deal in 20 minutes. I know. But instead, you let that moron present his garbage. He insisted on fresh eyes. Lucille laughed, a sharp sound that could cut glass. Fresh eyes? Christ, you know what fresh eyes get you in this business. Fresh unemployment? She closed the presentation. I have a proposition. She pulled out a different folder. Summit Dynamics letterhead visible through the paper. Director of Strategic Initiatives, my direct report, 3 times your current salary, Full team of 12 analysts. First project building out that Southeast Asia initiative you mentioned yesterday. I stared at the offer. It was everything I'd wanted 5 years ago. Everything I'd been working toward. There's a condition, she added. I want Marcus Chen and Priya Patel. They're your best people, right? They are. Ethan won't last the weekend once I pull the contract. Richard will need scapegoats. Your entire team will be restructured by Monday. She leaned back. Unless they're already gone. The chess game revealed itself fully. Lucille wasn't just offering me a job, she was offering me a rescue mission. When do you need an answer? Now, I have calls scheduled with Marcus and Priya at 3 p.m. Either I'm offering them jobs, or I'm not. I thought about 7 years at Vanguard. The late nights, the small victories, the promise that eventually, merit would matter more than connections. Then I thought about Ethan's smirk as he called me a slide beautification specialist. Yes. Lucille's smile was predatory. Excellent. Now, let's discuss the fun part, the contract termination. She pulled out her phone and showed me an email drafted to Richard. The subject line, termination of services, effective immediately. I've detailed every violation of our partnership agreement, presenting plagiarized materials as proprietary, fundamental misrepresentation of our business model, failure to provide qualified personnel. She scrolled down. The penalty clause is particularly entertaining. $78 million, gone. When are you sending it? Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern, gives Richard the weekend to panic. Try to fix things. Realize he can't. She stood. I want you starting at Summit in 2 weeks. That gives you time to watch the aftermath. Lucille, I said as she gathered her things. That slide 31. You knew it was mine. Harper, I've been reading your work for 7 years. You think I wouldn't recognize your voice? She paused at the door. You write like you think precise, elegant, deadly. Ethan writes like he talks all noise, no signal. After she left, I sat alone in the executive conference room, staring at the Seattle skyline. My phone was exploding with messages. Marcus got a call from Summit. What the hell? Priya, are you serious right now? Even one from Richard Harper. Need to discuss yesterday's presentation. My office. Now. I ignored them all and pulled out my personal laptop. Time to write my resignation letter. Short,